Last week was a big week in the fight to stop Obamacare. A judge in Florida ruled that the entire law was unconstitutional, and Senate Democrats defeated the repeal measure that had passed the House. James Poulos sat down with Guy Benson, political editor of townhall.com, to talk about the big picture on Obamacare. They looked at all the major fronts against a health care law, starting with the idea that the House might just simply defund it.
And meanwhile, we've got defunding on the table as well. How would you like to see that branch of the attack move forward on Obamacare?
Well, I mean, that's the starve the beast mentality that we've been hearing so much about. And as we know, all sorts of funding legislation, all funding and tax legislation really starts in the House. And so if the House refuses to fund it, it's not going to get funded. Now, that's going to probably set up some battles between the House and the Senate, since they're controlled by two different parties. But that's one of the tactics that I know Republicans have at their disposal, which is to say, you know, that's fine. You guys can refuse to play ball on repeal, but we're not going to appropriate funds for a number of the elements of implementation. And I think that Republicans absolutely will play that card, and we'll see if John Boehner and Eric Cantor can hold the line and keep their folks together to make sure that the Republicans don't budge. Because you know what Democrats are going to do. They're going to try to say that Republicans are holding an entire budget hostage. They Sure. like using that terminology. And they're saying, look, we want to fund the government. We want a budget, which could be interesting considering that they didn't pass an entire 2011 budget for all of last year for political reasons. But they'll say, we want a budget, right? And Republicans are blocking it for pure political calculation. They're holding the entire thing hostage to health care repeal. And Republicans need to be ready to combat that message thoroughly, and I think they probably will be able to do it.
So that's right. I think that's right. There are political perils there in negotiating the defunding aspect of this that might not even be there, ironically, in some ways, I think, just going sort of full force for repeal. Here's something I like to do for my guests. I like to appoint them president for a minute. Okay, so you're the president. Congratulations. Even if repeal fails in the Senate, you're not going to be happy, right? This is your marquee legislative accomplishment. This is your defining achievement as president. What do you do? How do you handle it?
So I'm President Obama. I'm not President Guy Benson.
Well, okay. Let's start out with you as President Obama, and then we'll see where that gets us.
Okay. Well, because I was getting pretty excited there until I realized that I was President Obama, and that was a little bit less exciting. Of course, I veto it. There's no doubt it's his signature legislative accomplishment. He thinks it's the right thing to do for the country. He thinks it's the right direction to move things. And I've argued consistently that I think President Obama is a man of the left, a committed man of the left, who is open to using pragmatic steps to move the country in that direction, in his preferred direction. So that's what we've seen on a number of occasions from him. But yeah, he can kill this thing dead for at least a couple of years, or as long as he's president. And I suppose that is precisely what he'll do if a repeal vote ever passes the Senate, which I think absolutely will not be the case in the next couple of years. I think that's almost impossible because the Democrats do have the votes to defeat it. And even if Republicans can pull off a couple wavering Democrats, whether it's Ben Nelson or a guy like Jim Webb or maybe John Tester, guys who are going to be up for very tough re-election battles in 2012, even if Republicans can somehow cobble together a tiny majority of 51 votes,
right,
Harry Reid can still make sure that they filibuster any repeal bill there. And Republicans would probably point out that, hey, I thought Democrats were all about reforming the filibuster, and now they might be forced to use it as the majority party, which would be kind of rich, but they'd absolutely do it. This is the holy grail, and they will do anything that they can to protect this health care bill, this health care law.
That's a nice irony there. Now, regardless of whether or not Obama vetoes it or doesn't need to veto it, he's going to have to respond in some way to the fact that repeal is moving along. It's not moving along symbolically. It's actually happening, even if it's not going to become the law of the land sooner rather than later. How is he going to respond politically? What options does he have? Just to go for demonization or try to strike some reasonable tone? What's it going to be?
Well, the strategy that we've already started to see from Democrats in the early going first of all, they were caterwauling and just shrieking about this repeal vote, arguing simultaneously that it was nothing but pure theater, and at the same time adamantly opposing it and getting very angry. So if it were completely meaningless, I don't know why they would waste so much breath being so angry, but be that as it may, they did. And so the go-to strategy that we're seeing here is what exactly they did leading up to the health care vote. I was on another network last week, and I was asked a question about this, and they said, look, Democrats, they've got new mojo here. They've got momentum. The repeal effort is petering out a little bit. The public is coming around. They're starting to love Obamacare. And the reason why Democrats have been able to harness the narrative is because they're using personal anecdotes to illustrate tales of genuine sadness for people who have been perhaps underserved by the current healthcare system. And they'll say, well, look at this sick, coughing child, Betsy. If Republicans have their way and their evil druthers, sick little coughing Betsy, who's currently getting health care thanks to this law, will have it snatched away and she'll die. I mean, that's honestly what they're doing. I described it as exploiting sob stories, and I was excoriated by some liberals on the panel for using the phrase sob stories. But my goal there was not to diminish in any way the actual human suffering that surely occurs around the country, as it does in places like Canada and Great Britain, I think to an even larger extent, that have full-fledged government-run health care. But simply to point out that the Democrats' strategy of trying to exploit and kind of capitalize politically on human suffering to delegitimize and paper over legitimate substantive problems that people have with what a lot of us believe to be a fatally flawed bill, that's really cynical. And if they think that's a new tactic on their part, then they're kidding themselves, because they did it for a year and a half and it failed to win the public over, but now they're going to give it another go around, and here comes the demagoguery. It's on its way. It's already here.
You know, I got to say, not only is it cynical from my perspective at least, it's disingenuous. I mean, look, we all know that human suffering is real and that there are Americans who are suffering out there, but that's really not the issue, right? The issue is whether or not this piece of legislation is constitutional, whether it's affordable, and whether or not it's just going to make matters worse and sort of double down the sort of healthcare monopolies or cartel-like sort of arrangements that we've got in place now, whether it's just going to make matters worse, right? There are all these promises, oh, it's going to bend the cost curve, it's going to extend coverage to sort of everyone that you'd ever want to extend coverage to. And the issue isn't the suffering, right? The issue is whether or not this is the kind of thing that's actually going to hold up when it gets to the Supreme Court, and whether or not it actually hangs together as a bill. So we've got these court cases coming along then. They're sort of chugging their way along. There are a few different lines of attack. One's going sort of the interstate commerce route. The other one's going the general welfare clause route. How would you like to see these cases proceed? Do you want to see sort of an expedited move to the Supreme Court? Do you think that's the kind of thing that would help or hurt matters now?
I mean, I think it would probably help. I know the Commerce Clause is the primary justification that leftists are using constitutionally to defend the bill, although a lot of Democrats have been asked questions about that, and they just completely make up clauses of the Constitution to justify Obamacare, which has been fairly entertaining to watch.
It's the joy of a living Constitution.
Right, exactly. You can just kind of, yeah, precisely, just make stuff up as you go along. Sheila Jackson Lee had some particularly nuanced thoughts on the constitutionality of Obamacare, saying that she actually argued that Obamacare is now a constitutional right. And by repealing it, you would be depriving people of their due process and their right to life and the pursuit of happiness. So you can just kind of contemplate that for a second and see how that goes over. But look, I'm in favor of this all-of-the-above approach to defeating and eradicating Obamacare.
I agree. The prudence is there. I do want to raise one point of caution, which I think can get lost in the shuffle amidst all the excitement here. We got to remember there are a lot of people out there still who like Obamacare. Either they're expecting big benefits or they care so much about extending coverage that, you know, I don't think they care whether it's constitutional or what it is. They would look at us and say, hey guys, that's not the issue. Don't stress out about this constitutional thing, right? We pass the laws that we want and then we're all happy when we get them. Republicans need to say something to these kinds of people that they can deal with, right? Other than, you're wrong, shut up, we're done. What's the message? How do you get that message across to people who really do like what's going on with Obamacare in a way that doesn't give up principled ground, but can connect that with them on some level that actually moves the conversation forward in a way that Republicans can benefit from?
Well, I think "you're wrong, shut up, we're done" was the unofficial slogan of the Nancy Pelosi Congress. So Republicans would be unwise to adopt it themselves. And I don't think that they are. I think challenging the constitutionality of this law is, again, one track to go down. But I think the far more persuasive one, and the one that has turned public opinion against Obamacare to begin with, is the fact that the Democrats' bill, which is now the law of the land, hopefully temporarily, does not accomplish on its own terms the things that they promised it would. And you alluded to a couple of them earlier. If you think about big promises of the health care law as it moved forward, one of them was it will bend the cost curve down. We saw the Medicare actuary, the government's own actuary, come out with a report a few months ago saying, not true, it's going to bend it up. It promised, or Democrats promised, that it would reduce the deficit. We now know when you get rid of all the gimmicks, it increases the deficit, bloats it by hundreds of billions of dollars in the first 10 years. Paul Ryan has done really good work exposing that, as has the former head of the CBO, who kind of knows what he's talking about, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. What else were we promised? Oh, it would improve people's access to quality care. There was a survey came out last week of American doctors, 2/3 of whom said that they believe health care, not access, but actual care or coverage, because I think there's a big difference between care and coverage. So they can say, look, everyone's covered, but whether you have access to care is what should matter to people. And 2/3 of doctors, according to that survey, said they believe that the quality of health care is going to go down. And finally, the famous phrase that we could all repeat in our sleep, he said it so often from the president, was, if you like your plan, if you like your doctor, you can keep them. No one will take them away no matter what.
Right.
That has already proven to be absolutely, blatantly, flagrantly untrue on a number of fronts. So if you take 4 of those big promises that they put up in bright lights, they all fail under a little bit, just even a little bit of scrutiny. And I think that's the message that Republicans will keep hammering home, saying, look, they promised a panacea. It is anything but. It has to go. And by the way, check out our ideas, which we've had available for more than a year, online and elsewhere, because we do want to address some of these concerns, just not the way that it's already been done.
Right. It's amazing to me how much they had to promise to actually get this thing through, and I think that there's a broader lesson here, which is if you want to embark on a mission to create this size of entitlement and this scope of government power extended into a new realm of American society, you are not going to get that input to come out the other side as good governance. It's just not going to happen.
Look, and I think if we want to make a parallel here, just to be a little bit bipartisan, and this might not be the best kind of allusion to make here or comparison, but still, if you think about it for a second, and I say this as someone who was supportive of the war in Iraq, I think you saw the popularity of that war effort decline pretty steadily as people started to realize in the general populace that, boy, things are going to be a lot harder than the administration initially may have suggested. Because you remember hearing all the comments about we'll be greeted as liberators, it'll be a pretty quick endeavor, you know,
sure.
Victory,
Cakewalk.
the mission accomplished sign.
Right.
Right, exactly. Cakewalk, precisely. I think that people weren't ready, they weren't expected, they weren't sold a long, drawn-out, really hellacious battle for the heart and soul of a country. And so when it became clear that the cakewalk wasn't exactly going to materialize, you saw people really pivot against the war pretty quickly.
Sure,
and look, I still think it was the right thing to do. I'm just saying you have to be very careful when you make big promises to the American people. And in this case, at least the benefit of the Iraq War was we rid the world of a terrible regime that was doing all sorts of illegal things on the international stage.
Right. Yeah.
I don't quite see all those side benefits of Obamacare at all.
No, I take your point, and I think, you know, when you get down to it, it's a good one. You can't promise the American people the moon and make them you know, sort of write checks that the Treasury can't cash or that the American people can't cash, and then expect that when you get to the nitty-gritty, you're going to come through in the clutch. It's just not going to happen. It's not happening here in the case of Obamacare. Guy Benson, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I got to get myself one of those cardigans that you've got. I'm admiring your cardigan via satellite.
I'll send you my tailor's references, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Guy's on your radio with the aptly named Guy Benson Show, and on your internet at townhall.com, where he is the political editor. There's one more point here that bears emphasis: jobs. Republicans insisted on framing Obamacare as a jobs killer, a piece of legislation deserving repeal because of what it does to the economy. That's not wrong, but it is a wee bit misleading. The real problem with Obamacare, to repeat, goes far beyond its impact on jobs numbers. Valid as our worries are, we've got to get out of the dependent habit of thought that tempts Americans to demand that government create jobs, in the same spirit as some Americans demand that government furnish them with health care. When it comes to government and jobs, I'm still waiting for some politico to come forward and say that Washington should destroy some government jobs. It's no surprise that Obamacare is collapsing under its own weight. The only shocker is that it's crumbling so quickly. Now onto the real challenge, a shift in the frame of mind that made all those promises sound so sweet. That's the bottom line. I'm James Polis. I will see you next time.